Here we go. Well, welcome to the world,
Yeah.
Professor Anne Bamford. Lovely to be here. Thank you for this agreeing to this interview. Can you tell me a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I'm originally from Australia, so I'm actually Tasmanian. So was born and bred in Tasmania, and I began my career as a teacher. And I wanted to become a teacher right from the word go. And the reason for that was because I had a teacher in Year 5 who completely transformed my life. I found learning quite difficult, which is funny when you're a professor and you've got all degrees and letters after your name, but I really struggled with learning, especially with memorising things. I still have a very poor memory, and so learning was quite hard. And I was in Year 5, so I was about 10 years old. And at the time they graded the children. There was an A class and a B class, and they had rows, and they sat the children in the rows based on, the brightest kid was at the front and the dumbest kid was at the back, and I was in the second back seat of the B class, so that gives a bit of a thing, and things were not good, and I couldn't really learn, and I had a quite terrible teacher, really. Fortunately he left, and a lovely teacher came, Mrs. Holman, never met her since. But she could see that if there were there might be other ways I could learn, and she straight away would say to me, draw a picture or do some drama. She put me in a play, and she said, well, it's weird because you can remember every line of the play and be perfectly on cue. Right. And so that transformed my learning, and from then on I loved learning, literally, and as a result of that I wanted to become a teacher. So I started as a teacher. Fast forward, I then went into teacher education. I did a lot of degrees. One of my degrees, my doctorate degree, won an International Research Award, and it was using an unusual method. I used a notion of quilting to bring together stories of teachers. So I used which was unusual as a research method, but to me I had to visualise it, I had to see it, I had to... and then as a result of that, long story short, I was asked to go to UNESCO to do a study for their Education for All strategy. Did the study, it was called the Wow Factor, where what was lovely about it was that good education, when it happens all over the world, looks quite similar. Right. And so there were some lovely stories from Cuba to Kuwait, or literally all over the world, where education was being done really well. And so from then on did large-scale evaluations for both UNESCO and then for a lot of countries. So I know a lot about the education in different countries and how to bring around change. And now I'm Director of Education and Skills and Culture at the City of London. So I'm an immigrant to the United Kingdom. Hopefully, one that's brought something to the place. But
And what do you do in your job now? What does that entail?
Okay, so as strategic director in the city, it's quite an innovative job in its own description, because historically the city, for many hundreds of years actually, has always been involved in education. So they set up schools very early on, actually for the street kids. So they wanted to get the naughty little boys off the street, and so they set up schools to pull them in. And the idea was if they got them into the school, then they could teach them a trade. So they could teach them stonemasonry or carpentry or something. They could make them useful rather than pests, because they were doing a lot of minor crime and things that perhaps somewhat haven't changed today. So they set up schools for orphans and for street children, and so they had a commitment to education. And equally, the livery companies started to be established, and they had a really strong remit around skills, these broader based skills. And also at the same time, the City Bridge Trust began, which was a charity they set up when they built the first of the bridges to cross the Thames. They charged a really small amount of money for people to cross the Thames, and they put that money into an account, and they basically said the profits of that were to go mainly towards education and culture. So from that they built things like the Museum of London, the Barbican, and all these wonderful cultural facilities. And the clever thing about my job, I think, is that it brings together education, culture and skills for the future. So it says the sort of skills we need for the future come at the intersection of all of these areas, and it's still very heavily committed to social mobility. So how do we make sure that those assets are available to everybody, that it doesn't just further privilege some people and leave other people behind? And so that's the sort of heart of what I try to do. So it's quite an innovative job I've got. Wonderful.
And what do you think of, at the moment, really the great challenges in the education system to achieve those goals?
I think it really does strike at the heart of what those three parts of my job are about, because I think that what you've got is a greater gap between what schools are doing and what's needed in the world today. And sometimes when I'm giving a talk, I put up a slide, and it's a report card, and I found it in an educational archive, and it was from 100 years ago. And it's got the subjects listed and how the child performs and what. And when I put it up, even though it's 100 years old, everybody in the room recognises, A, it's a report card. They recognise the subjects, which haven't changed. And this report card's interesting because on one side it's got what's happening in the school, and on the other side it's got their homework or their home tasks. And when you look at the school, it's maths, it's English, it's geography, it's history. It's exactly the same as if you walked into one of my schools today. But if you look on the home task, it has things like feed the chickens, do the washing, milk the cows, do mechanical work. That was considered the relevant home tasks at that time. And you see how radically, with the influence of technology, with the influence of societal changes, we're in a completely different world, and yet our schools have remained fairly static. And where I'm placed in the city, you have businesses saying we cannot get the sort of people we need for the jobs we've got because they haven't got the ways of thinking that we need for the future. So I think there's this really... So to answer your question about the crisis, the first crisis is the growing gap between what happens in the school and what's needed in the world. The second crisis, I think, is related to the cultural sector. And this is perhaps the first crisis is a global crisis that's happening all over the world. The second crisis, I think, is a particular problem in England, and that is that the arts have been systematically removed from the curriculum. And so what you have now is a very limited curriculum that the children are getting. Now, there's been some good work in the last couple of years to try and bring it back. So Ofsted are now looking at, are you giving a child a balanced education? You've got the Durham Commission looking at the role of creativity in education. But this is quite late in the day and quite ironic for England, because if you think of what England is known for, it's known for fashion, it's known for the West End, it's known for culture, and yet we've systematically removed those. And when I go to other parts of the world, what surprises me, you know, if I go to South Korea, they're trying to really build a cultural and artistic capital when they didn't really have, you know, when they're trying to sort of start getting that into their schools. We had it, but we took it out, which is it's really ironic, especially when the creative industries, so, you know, a third of the jobs in London are related to the creative industries. It's more profitable than the finance industry, you know. So we have to so I think that the other crisis is connected to the cultural side, that if you don't include skills, education and culture as being a three-legged stool, if you chop one of the legs off, the stool wobbles and it falls down. So
one of the things that I've found in my work with the kind of left brain, right brain, you know, kind of education, if you like, and how the creative drama, music, arts has as you say, has diminished in to push maths, technology, science, engineering, STEM, right? But if you take someone like Steve Jobs from Apple, the guy took he took a little box, and he said, "I'm going to put 1,000 songs on this little box. I want to make this thing." And it wasn't engineering, and it wasn't maths, or it wasn't science that gave him that idea, that gave him that drive and gave him those ideas. And it seems to me that it's so needed that when you balance education, then it enables these things to come out, these solutions. As Einstein said, we can't solve the problems with the consciousness that created it, so therefore we need to try to shift the consciousness. I mean, one of the things that I've found in my work is the time. You know, we've spoken to the teachers and said, look, it's so important to spend a bit of time to do some exercise, to do some mindfulness, to do some breathing. And they say time and time again, we don't have the time for that. Yeah. Because we've got so much to fit in. Yeah. Ticking all these boxes, learning all these things. When if they did take some time, they'd be able to do it more effectively.
But what's interesting is that is something that's becoming apparent across the board in all subject areas, not just in the arts. So, for example, I had a meeting with the Royal Society, so the science people, and they were saying, if you look at the subject of chemistry, chemistry is based on around 6 key concepts. I'm not a chemist, so I don't know, but it's based around 6 key concepts. Instead of focusing the education for children on those 6 key concepts, they give them volumes of content. So their textbooks are like, really thick. Yeah. And the teachers are pressing on to get through all this because the textbooks and the exams are linked together. And the teacher feels, if I don't cover that page, that might be just the thing that's in the exam. I better do that. So the teachers become a slave to doing that because of the unknown factor of the exam and what it might cover, and I can't make the children miss out by not covering. But the problem then is they're so battling through that content, they're not doing the experiments, they're not getting a chance to problem solve in chemistry, they're not learning, and the basic concepts get lost in that vast volume. So when they go to university, the university lecturers are saying we have to reteach them the 6 core concepts because they might have had 7 or 8 years of chemistry at school, but they don't actually understand it. So you've also got an issue of this sort of losing the broad way that disciplines, that learning enables. Like in my case, I told you the story of me as a young child. For me, drama and drawing unlock the world of learning. For somebody else, it might be doing the science experiment that unlocks the world, or the excursion to the beach to learn the geography or whatever. But if you're so pushed that all you can do is time-wise, you're cracking on in the most efficient way, or you think, to get it done, you're losing all those natural connections. Like, I always remember the story of the guy who invented DNA, and he'd done all the science and the maths and he couldn't work it out, and then he modelled the double helix, because he said, and then he knew the answer, because he said, I knew it was going to be something beautiful, and if I didn't make the physical model of it, I would never have realised the connections, because he sort of had it all there, but he knew it had to be something beautiful. It wouldn't be something weird, like it wouldn't look like a bag of all unconnected things. It would be a beautiful work of art, which of course it was. So I think that connectivity between, we don't learn in silos. And tying to what I said about the future, I think it's even more important, because people now are not going for a job. You're not going to be a whatever for the rest of your life. You're going to do so many different things that you need to have this sort of bank of different qualities that you can bring to bear on whatever the job is, because you're unlikely to be in the same job doing the same thing. No one is. You're lucky to be, the average time a person stays in a job now is less than 2 years. So if you take that across, if we now say we're going to work till we're 70, it's a lot of different jobs you're going to do.
Sure.
And if you haven't got those different capacities, if you've just got a single way of doing it, you really will struggle.
Absolutely. I think it's like you're saying about looking at the world and looking at what the different world does. I've lived in India and looking at some of their systems and some of the schools there, where outside learning is such an important thing of it, where daily yoga, where daily meditation. And when I set up the Wellbeing in Schools initiative 10 years ago, and we were trying to encourage these simple practices, and I'd say to people, well, the story when I went to Japan and we went to the Nissan car factory. I'm going back nearly 30 years. And all the people were doing the exercises.
To begin with,
getting them into it. And we were saying, let's do the wellbeing exercises that I designed. Let's start the day with the wellbeing exercises. Start the day with getting oxygen to the brain. Start the day with doing movement. The reason they built those cars so well was because they took that time out to stimulate the capacity. But as I've gone through the journey with the Wellbeing in Schools work, encouragingly, someone told me to say today, one of the mums at school, she said, there's 450 schools now teaching meditation to the children. And as you mentioned about the mindfulness guy you were talking to,
one little simple conversation,
that these things now are starting to reach out. And what I've found is that it's gone from a shift from people thinking that well-being in schools was like a soft skill. It was something that, it might be useful, to now something that is necessary.
And I think that's a really important point, because when we talk about the skills that we need to survive now and into the future, we use the word fusion skills or fusion. And we sort of invented that word, and it was somewhat a random word, although it does capture what we wanted to say, which is about bringing things together, joining things up, the fusion of minerals and different elements to make bronze or whatever. But the reason we didn't use soft skills is because if people refer to it as soft skills, it implies they're easy to get, they're not important. Whereas actually these days, those so-called soft skills are in fact the most challenging to get. They're the highest order in terms of, if you're very strong in some of those soft, in inverted commas, soft skills, you'll be getting the top jobs in in industry, in business, in all these areas, because you have that extra capacity. And so when you're introducing it to children, it makes logical sense that what you're actually doing is priming those children for learning, which should be stimulating their brain and body and heart and organs. We are what we are, and so it makes really good logical sense.
That's a good use of words as well.
We've done a lot of research around this because we've looked. The problem you have in a school is when I said about school doesn't change. If we're trying to make schools change, we have to do it a long time in advance, because, for example, a child born today won't finish school until 2038, and that's not university. That's just normal school. The compulsory bit. So if you think of that, my job as an education policy maker is to say, how do I make sure that the school is delivering the things that child needs? Giving them, in Norway they talk about children having a sort of backpack and what needs to go in that backpack for them to carry throughout life. Well, we have to think about what are they going to need in that backpack by 2038. And if you think of the change that's happened in the last 20 years, and even if we project only that same volume of change to that next 20 years, we're going to be in a situation where it's going to be a radically different world. Now, some of the things we know. So we know, for example, that artificial intelligence is likely to take out what we call middle skilled jobs. Ironically, a whole school system is designed around a few kids at the bottom, a few kids at the top, most people in the middle. So you straight away see a conflict between the aims of schools as they currently exist now and the aims that what a school would be trying to do for the future, for 2038. We have to really be looking at higher order skills. So that brings us back then to the point you're making in terms of we have to be starting very early to bring those higher order skills in. But we also didn't want it to be haphazard. And also we needed to know which skills were the most important. So we've done a lot of work, without getting too technical about it. We've looked at skills lists from all around the world. We've analysed those. We've put them into groups. We've also gone to business and said, which of these do you think are most important? And from that, we've got a priority list of 12. There's a top 12.
Brilliant.
Number 1 is communication. That doesn't surprise anybody. But it's interesting, so some of the others are things like creativity, problem solving, resilience, critical thinking. these are sort of the skills that will be, you might be pleased to hear or not, written communication is one of the 12 skills.
There
so actually being able to write is still important. So, some things stay the same, and that's lovely.
Yeah.
Because it's like, obviously the capacity to be able to write is still valued by people, which is lovely. But those skills are the skills that people think are going to be most important now and into the future. And we don't use the term either, future skills, because I said these are needed now. If you can't get your message across now, it's a problem. If you can't communicate with the one you love now, it's a problem. If children can't communicate the issues that are worrying them in the world, it's a problem. So these are not skills only for the future, but they will be the skills that are most likely to still be with us in the future. But brilliant. You need them today, you need them now. And so the sorts of work you're doing is to actually embed those for children now. And also you can't start too young. And also if you haven't got them, you need to be able to develop them at any age. So you also shouldn't stop learning those. It's just as important if you're 85,
for sure,
as it is when you're little. So it's very much about lifelong learning.
Brilliant.
And revisiting them, because even if you think you're very good at communication, you'll be in a situation where suddenly you can't communicate. Maybe you can't, as I said, in a relationship or with your own children, and so even your capacity to communicate, and you think, I'm really good at communication now, it can be really challenged by a situation you're in. So you're forced then to go back to your own learning and say, how do I learn to communicate in this situation where it's obviously not working? So you have to keep revisiting them. So it's not just a job, you can't finish school and go, great, got them all done, I'm out the door.
I think so.
You'll have to keep coming back and revisiting these, and that will be the people who will be successful in the future in all aspects of their life. The people who will flourish will be the people who are able to have those and continue to develop those fusion skills. And we're seeing fusion in all aspects of our life, fusion between disciplines, fusion in different ways of thinking about all sorts of aspects of our lives. And so it's quite exciting in some ways. It's absolutely. Sort of, it's opening the door to new possibilities, and I'm always, people sort of say, do you feel pessimistic for the future? I'm like, no, I feel really optimistic, because I think young people have this gives an opportunity that was perhaps we were much more put into sort of narrow pathways, whereas this is a much more exciting option, and it really is and the way we will solve our problems, I think, will be through these skills. So I'm positive about the future, but I think we also need to act quite urgently, because I think even if you take something like environmental issues, every issue starts with education, health, well-being, environmental, whatever, and it's no good just touching on the end product. It's about how you change people's way of thinking, because if they don't change the way of thinking and feeling, they're not going to change the way they behave. You have to understand that first before. So I don't think you can just focus on the sort of end product. You have to focus on the process.
On the steps, absolutely. I don't know if you've come across Dr. Chatterjee's work. The guy is the BBC doctor in the house there. And his 4 pillars plan. And we met Dr. Chatterjee.
Oh, right.
And his basic thing is, move your body. Eat well, sleep well, and chill out, and ways to do it from his years as being a GP, but how he's put the message out there, and he's had his #1 selling books and everything that he's done, got on the BBC, and what he's saying is what I've been saying to people for 20 years. And so some people have listened, but only so many people are ever going to listen to me. And I said to him when we met him, the message that you're putting out had to come from a doctor, because people would not take the message on. And he said, sadly, you're right.
Because there's an authority position of the doctor. But I wouldn't underestimate the work you're doing in schools, because, this is something, I think you have a unique position in the life of a child to be a catalyst and to cause catalytic change. I mentioned Mrs. Holman at the beginning. I've never met Mrs. Holman. I had her for less than 1 term of school. She was a replacement teacher, a casual teacher. yet she fundamentally influence my life and my way of thinking. And I have been lucky enough to be in positions where I can fundamentally influence the lives of other people. And so her one action for a couple of weeks of school has actually led to an awful lot of stuff that she's to blame for.
Yeah, bless her.
So
I totally get that.
But I
That's
think
a really lovely way to think
that's
about
really
it.
important, and that's a unique thing about working with children in education, because you never know. You don't know that when you're doing that mindfulness exercise with the group of 7-year-olds, that for one child that might be a complete revolution in their mind about how do I deal with some of these tensions in my life. Because one of the really sad facts in our schools is 1/3 of the children, by the time they leave school, have sought medical intervention for mental health issues. That's a crime. That is terrible. That's an awful thing. And it gets worse the more they're in school. So we have to also seriously think about what are the things we're doing that are really not good for children in these situations. You know, how are we talk a lot about safeguarding, but how are we really safeguarding the flourishing of a child, not just the being of a child. And I think that, you know, so I think really the work you're doing is incredibly powerful, because it changes, you know, even, or does it cause even that teacher to pause for 1 second and say, you know what, there might be a different way to speak to that child than I'm speaking to them, or I'm seeing something new in that child that I hadn't seen before. That's a really powerful message, and that's a story of life, of human, you know. So even though it seems, you might be like, oh, you know, I'm battling away at this and it's not getting, it actually is really making a huge difference.
With the thing with Dr. Chatterjee is that now that he's brought something like the importance of breathing into the mainstream, it seems that for me now, when I talk about it, and the people are writing books about it,
it's an easier pathway.
Because there's...
So you need to write a book.
Well, I need to become a doctor first, possibly.
Oh yeah, I've got that one.
that helps, right? A professor. But if you have some of these simple things, one of the things that we talked about with people in schools was that it was always for me the elephant in the room for education and health, that people weren't taught to breathe properly. That full breathing is filling the body with oxygen, filling the body cells, filling the brain cells with oxygen, allowing higher...
to do what it's meant to do.
Yeah. But it was such a simple thing that it seemed to have been missed. And I'd say, you know, to when I teach my yoga classes, who he was taught to breathe at school, and you might get one person out of 20. You know, people weren't taught these fundamental things, yet now this is starting to come in. And one of the things, as we talked about the mindfulness, was that if you use the word meditation, there's still some people who are frightened of it because they think it has a religious connotation, but mindfulness...
Or it's a bit spooky. Or
But mindfulness seems to have a more of a scientific, educational basis. It's the same thing, really, but there you go. It's just the language, isn't it? Like you're saying about the fusion.
Yeah, but I think language is important because, you know, I mean, when I wrote the Fusion White Paper to try and influence policymakers in this area, I put half a page of all the reasons why I wasn't calling it these other things, because I think language is important. Because as I said, if you call something, so for example, these skills are, you know, I mentioned soft skills, but another one is essential skills. People call them essential skills. And I said, that's such a terrible word, because if I'm meeting, you know, a 53-year-old woman who's returning to the workforce for the first time after looking after generations of her children, and I say to her, well, you're lacking the essential skills. How does that feel to her? How does that change her perception of her? Whereas if I meet the same lady and I say, you know what, you're really strong on the fusion skills related to communication, you're super strong on the organisational and management experience, it's a completely different story about her value and the value of the value she embodies as a human being. And I think that's another thing with when you're doing the mindfulness with children, you're also reminding the child of what they're bringing to the school. And often both teachers and children share very little of themselves. And I think that bringing your humanity to what you do, sharing a little bit of yourself, is so important to make that connection. That's how we work as humans. That's, you know, if you see a baby, everyone goes, oh, isn't that like... we want to make a connection. You know, we're hot-wired to want to connect with people. And even online, people want to connect, you know. So it's the same in the virtual environment. That hasn't been able to obscure it at all, because people still want that desire. And so I think you're also doing an important piece around connectivity, joining people up, you know, just giving them and also positioning them differently, because when they're doing that yoga and they're breathing together, they're all in the act together. It's not you and them, or and that's important too. We are just people. Yeah,
we are important. I was listening to the radio and they had a thing about singing and a campaign in schools, and my boys going to the O2 as part of the big choir.
You know, fantastic.
And it was Beverly Knight who was doing the kind of patron of it, and she said what people need to do is take that deep breath in the morning, and she said it used to be that you'd go to school and you'd sing.
You would
in assembly.
You first, you'd sing. Even God Save the Queen. It was something to sing, wasn't it? You could belt it out.
You could sing something, but and she said it didn't. And then I heard Leslie Garrett as well. She said it doesn't have to be anything religious, but that if people could do that they could express themselves in that. And I've also found that such a powerful thing, such a healing thing, using sound and bringing sound and music, and like with the singing bowl, the just that listening to it and hearing it, or just expressing that voice, these things that are so powerful. I met a guy once, and he was a brilliant, best drummer I've ever seen. And he said, when I was a boy where I lived in Africa, he said I'd go home and someone would hit a drum, and then the neighbour would hit a drum, and then you'd have 200 people in the village. Everyone was drumming together. And that sense of community, if we can bring these things in, even in a simple way. One of the things we do in the schools is this Namaste song. So we get all the kids, clapping. And singing together, and just that unity. And I think what that can bring for the benefits for people and
also
their minds.
Just slightly leaving behind all your worries and concentrating on something else, and just this is really powerful, because the young people in our schools often have extremely complex lives. They're dealing with a lot of issues. We're often unaware of those issues, or unaware of their coping strategies to deal with those issues. And many of our children are really brave survivors of different things. And I think just having that time when it's just to sing together or dance together, or and often things art teachers will say to me in the art classroom when children are painting or whatever, things will come out that they've not told anybody, because it's a situation where suddenly they're sort of in this otherworldly space. And I don't want that to sound sort of vague, but it's they're so involved in their art making that it's allowing them to actually talk about things that they perhaps have not really put words to. So I think those opportunities are few and far between in life, and they're even less likely in a school. So that's another powerful thing you're bringing in just a short time.
Yeah, wonderful. Anything else you'd like to add about?
No, I think I mean the only thing I'd say, because I don't know who's going to listen to this, but just for parents as well, like a simple thing to do is I say to parents, in your house or your flat or whatever, have just a little corner, like you can put a piece of tape on the ground or whatever. It doesn't have to be big. It can be a couple of feet square, but have that as a place where children can make a mess, because often what happens is that the house becomes full of bought toys and things where they can't actually be creative. So I just say, make a space in your house for creative things, and that's where you can go. Everybody can go if they want to write a story, if they want to sing, if they want to do a drawing, and you know, you don't have to have a massive space. It can be literally a couple of meters in a corner. And if every family did that, or if every person had that opportunity, or every school had that little corner, it's just a simple thing you can do. It doesn't cost any money, because it's actually better if it's got egg cartons and, you know, don't go out and buy expensive whatever, just whatever in there will do. You know, some pencils, some paper, back of, you know, cut up the cereal box or whatever, all fine.
Beautiful.
But just to have a space where children feel that's in the not in the corner of their bedroom where they're isolated, the middle of the house or the middle of the flat, somewhere where they feel that space just there. They can't make the mess all over the house, but there is a place where you can be creative.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm going to get my masking tape.
Your masking tape on the floor.
My whole house sounds like that, actually.
Yeah, you might be lucky. You've sort of got this really big...
I've got a bit, yeah.
I imagine it probably is, but as I said, for a lot of people...
For a lot of people, it's not.
It's not. And, you know, they'll often allow several metres for their widescreen TV, but not have even a couple of feet for a bit of creativity.
Creativity to help change the world.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed listening to that, whoever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.